The edition of this book that I'm holding is called Race of a Lifetime, but the book itself is better known by its US title, Game Change. Race of a Lifetime is the title that was used for the UK edition. In the US, it was called Game Change. Game Change, I'm sure, is probably the better known title, in part because that was the name of the HBO movie, which was based off of this book. Based off of only a very small part of this book, as it turns out, but based off of this book nonetheless. But I read the UK edition, and I think the only difference is like the title and the cover. I think the contents of the book are the same. But anyways, I read the UK edition because I'm living abroad. I'm actually living in Vietnam, but I work with a lot of people from the UK. And I picked this edition up at a book exchange at work where it was dropped off by, I believe, a coworker from New Zealand. So I guess that they have the UK edition in New Zealand. Now, at the time I picked this up, I didn't actually realize this was Game Change. I've seen the HBO movie. In fact, I've talked about it on this channel. I'll link to my review of the HBO movie in the description down below. But when I picked this up, I didn't realize that was the same book. I just realized that this was a book about the 2008 presidential election. Now, if you watch this channel, you'll know that I don't review a lot of books on recent politics. I mean, this is a book written by journalists about, it's a journalist book about the recent news. I've always been meaning to read more of that, and I've been inspired by some booktubers like Steve Donahue, who read a lot of those books, because I'm interested in history, and after all, this is history. I mean, it's the first draft of history, but it's recent history, but it's history, huh? But I've never gotten around to it, and, you know, there are always so many other books calling for your attention. But this book was it was on the book exchange at work, and I picked it up, and I was mildly interested in it. So I flipped through it, and one of the first things I flipped open to was a conversation between John Edwards and his campaign staff about an affair that John Edwards was having. And the campaign staff was nervous about confronting him about it. They finally worked up the courage to confront him about it and said, John, look, this is the perception people are getting, and it's not good. John Edwards said, yep, I hear you loud and clear. Say no more. I'm on it. And then nothing changed. That little narrative there about... It was told in a narrative fashion. So had reconstructed conversations between John Edwards and his campaign staff about what was going on. It had like a narrative drama about his campaign staff distress about John Edwards' behavior. And the whole thing was just incredibly well written. And even though it is a journalistic book, it almost had the feeling of a novel, like you were reading a scene out of a soap opera. And I was hooked. And I thought, okay, this looks like it could be a really interesting book. And I picked it up. It's been on my shelves for about a year. It took me a little bit to get around to it. But I've finally gotten around to it now. And yeah, it is a really interesting book. It's got so many interesting little tidbits in there. And it's well written in a very engaging way. Now, there is a lot to talk about in this book, both about the contents of the book itself, maybe some of the fallout resulting from the book. There are any number of philosophical questions we could ask that are inspired by this book, like, is our system broken? Is our electoral system broken? It is certainly one question that jumps out at you while reading this book. And I'll try and explore as much of that as I can, but I'm up against the same constraints I am in every video. My video camera will only record 30-minute video files before it automatically shuts down. And because of my nature, because I'm a little bit rambling and inconcise, I always tend to butt up against that time limit and only end up saying half of what I want to say. But I'll say as much as I can about this book. So this is a book about the 2008 election, which I know seems like it was another lifetime ago now, and yet it's something we all remember, I'm sure. So I'm coming to this a little bit late. It was published, when was this published? I think this was published just right after the 2008 election, a year or two after. But because I'm just picking it up now as a used book, obviously it's a little bit more time removed, which to a certain extent is all the better. I mean, if you were to pick this up right after the election, you'd be just rehashing news stories that you were already sick of. The fact that there's a little bit of distance now between us and the 2008 election makes revisiting this a little bit more interesting, I think. The book is divided into 3 parts, but they are not 3 equal parts. There's the Democratic primary, so you remember that, Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama, and remember how that just went on and on and on. And then there's the Republican primary, which is much shorter, and then there's the general election. But of the, how many pages is this book? Of the 436 pages, the Democratic primary, Barack Obama versus Hillary, takes up 271 pages. So over half the book. And of course, John Edwards and his train wreck, where he was, his train wreck of a campaign where he was cheating on his wife with an affair and it all came out. Then there's a much shorter section on the Republican campaign, and then a short section on the general election. Again, the bulk of this is on Hillary Clinton versus Barack Obama in the Democratic primary. The rest of the book almost feels a little bit like an afterthought. Now, the HBO movie was all about Sarah Palin. And again, I've talked about that movie before. I'll link to my review of it in the description down below. But it was interesting reading this book, how little percentage-wise Sarah Palin actually does figure in this book. On Wikipedia and other online sources, I've seen people say that the Sarah Palin part is only the last third of this book. But it's not even that. I mean, Sarah Palin really doesn't enter the picture until like page 350 out of a 450-page book. So, Sarah Palin is like the last barely even fifth of the book. Oh, okay, more than a fifth. But you get what I mean. And then even in that, even when she enters the picture, they're still juggling several different stories at once. So we're still going back and forth between McCain's camp and Obama's camp. So really, Sarah Palin makes up maybe 50 pages of this book, I would estimate. So it's in one sense, it's a little bit odd that the HBO movie focused just on Sarah Palin, which really is quite a small part of this book. And I can imagine conservatives, because you know how conservatives always like to complain that the media treats them unfairly. I can imagine conservatives complaining about that, because there is plenty of gossip about the Democratic candidates. I mean, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Jonathan Edwards, nobody comes out looking good from this book. And we'll hopefully get to some of those details in a moment. But according to Wikipedia, apparently they did consider doing the Democratic primary part of this book, but decided it was too long in the end. And narratively, that was the right decision. I mean, the Democratic primary just goes on and on and on. It doesn't have like a succinct narrative. So if you were looking to choose one part of this book which you could make into a condensed story and which was filmable and which had all the drama and plot twists and stuff like that, the Sarah Palin part, even though it's a small part of this book, that's where you'd want to go for. So while I'm talking about the Sarah Palin part, as speaking as somebody who's seen the movie a few different times actually, most of the dialogue from the movie does come from the book. I realized after having read the book that the movie does kind of amp up the drama and the emotions behind some of these speeches. So it's dialogue that comes across a little bit normal or just kind of conversational in the book gets amped up into kind of shouting matches in the movie version. And I guess that's what you do. You just dramatize it in the movie. There's also a number of things in the movie that aren't in the book. For example, in the movie, there's a big deal made of Sarah Palin wanting to give a concession speech and butting heads with Steve Schmidt, the organizer of the campaign, who wouldn't let her do it. None of that is in the book, but I'm assuming that comes from other sources. According to Wikipedia, this book was not the only source for the movie. They also read other articles and books and interviewed more people for the movie. So that's that. But I don't want to make this whole review about the movie. There's a lot more to talk about in this book. So yeah, where to begin with this? There is... Okay. Yeah, let me back up and maybe give some background here. The authors, in their author's notes, describe somewhat the process with which they wrote this book, which is a lot of sources were on deep background. Now, deep background, as I understand it, and I don't have a journalist degree or anything like that, journalism degree, but I believe deep background is when a source is not willing to be quoted, but gives you information that you can use. Sounds like almost everybody was on deep background in this book because there are all sorts of conversations which are reported or reconstructed, but no sources are given. There's an index here, but no bibliography. Now, there are in a number of conversations where it's quite easy to guess who the source was. So, there's a source between two people. There's a conversation between two people. And one of those people does not come off looking very good in that conversation. Then it's quite easy to guess that the source must have been the other person in the room, etc. But I guess... So even though you can kind of guess who the source must have been for some of this stuff, most of these sources were on deep background, which is something the authors have been criticized for. Although according to Wikipedia, this is not an unusual style in journalist books like this. Apparently Bob Woodward's books are all like this as well. The problem, though, with going on deep background is there's no accountability. So if people have an axe to grind or want to portray somebody in an unfavorable light, it's quite easy for them to do so without ever being held accountable for anything that they said. And the book has been criticized for that. But I am, and again, take me with a grain of salt because I don't know anything about journalism, but just intuitively, I'm sympathetic to the fact that the authors had to do this on deep background, because if you were going to get the kind of gossip that they got, and they got a lot of gossip for this, then of course you have to do it on deep background, because people are not going to end their careers for this book. And the type of things that get reported in this book are the type of things that could end somebody's career. In fact, after this book got released, according to Wikipedia, there were any number of political blowback from it. So Harry Reid in this book apparently reported that Obama speaks very good dialect for a Negro, or something like that. And Harry Reid had to make an apology for that. Bill Clinton is reported in this book having a conversation with Ted Kennedy, in which he's trying to get Ted Kennedy not to endorse Obama. And Bill Clinton said, 20 years ago, Obama would have been serving us coffee, or 50 years ago, Obama would have been serving us coffee, or something like that, which was construed as like a racial remark. And Bill Clinton got a lot of heat for that once this book got published. So what was my main point again? Oh, my main point is I'm sympathetic to the fact that you can't write a book like this and have people attributed, have people not on deep background. I was about to say you can't have people on the record, but I think technically deep background is a type of being on the record. Is that right? I don't know. Let me know if I'm getting my terminology wrong. Anyways, as the authors say in their introduction, they say, this is kind of still the first draft of history. People always say like newspapers are the first draft of history. The authors in their introduction say this is like the draft 1.5, the first and a half draft of history. In the future, maybe when people sift through this and get stuff that's actually on the record with sources attached, we'll have some maybe information that's more reliable. But the authors say what makes this book so fresh is that it was written immediately after the election when everything was still fresh in people's minds. I mean, good luck reconstructing all these conversations if you wait 50 years to interview people. So the fact that it's so fresh necessitates it being on deep background, but also allows the authors to reconstruct a lot of stuff. So I don't know. I guess you take it for what it's worth. Now, that being said, that disclaimer aside, there's a lot of juicy gossip in here. One of the things that surprised me was it's reported in this book that it apparently was common knowledge in Washington that Bill Clinton was having an extramarital affair in 2006. So everybody remembers, of course, the affair with Monica Lewinsky he had during his presidency, the rumored affairs he had before his presidency. But I didn't remember hearing anything in 2006 about Clinton's marital affairs. And granted, I was living abroad at that time, so I might have missed something. But as I was reading this book, I Googled it. Clinton affair 2006. And couldn't find anything. I had a hard time finding stuff on Google. And even within this book, they don't actually name who the woman is. But apparently everybody in Washington was in agreement that he was definitely having an affair. Even Hillary's people looked into it. And they don't say her name in the book, but they said that there was one name that was verifiable when they looked into people that Clinton was having affairs with. So I guess that's this thing that happened. And of course, John Edwards' affair. Now, John Edwards' affair, we all know about because that totally blew up in his face during 2008, and that's all in here as well. McCain was widely rumored to be having an affair with, I believe her name was Vicky Eisman. Am I remembering that right? At the time this book was written, that wasn't actually proven. But just this past year or last year, maybe it was, Steve Schmidt came forward and said, actually, yes, McCain was definitely having an affair with her. I had to cover it all up and bite the bullet. And Steve Schmidt, in his Substack, describes the conversations he had with Vicky Eisman, who was screaming at him because she was distraught because McCain said she was just a very good friend and nothing else. So that's all drama that came out after this book was published. But during this book, it's very heavily hinted, in this book, it's very heavily hinted that McCain is having an affair and his staff is bracing for the blowback that's going to happen when the press reports it, and the New York Times does report it. But at that time, it wasn't certain that McCain was having an affair. It was just he'd been spending a lot of time in this woman's company, and it looked suspicious. But I guess it didn't become proven that he had an affair until afterwards. It does make you wonder a little bit if Jonathan Edwards got treated a little bit unfairly, or maybe unfairly is not the right word, but I remember a lot of people, some of my own family members, were saying, oh, that Jonathan Edwards, pure evil to do that to his wife. She's going through cancer and he's having an affair, well she's dying of cancer and stuff like that. And it wasn't good that John Edwards did it, but you read this book and you think, okay, a lot of these guys are doing it. They're all slime balls. And you do get the impression reading this book that they are all slime balls. I guess maybe I'm getting into the philosophical parts of the discussion here. But I once saw a tweet on Twitter. I forget who it was by, and I guess who it by is not important. But the substance of the tweet was the problem with our electoral democracy system is that sociopathic narcissists are attracted to these positions of power like moths to a flame. And our system really doesn't have a good way for filtering them out. Just, the idea that everybody who wants to be president should never be president. Like, the type of narcissism that you would have to actually think that you are good to be president, want to be president, should disqualify you from the job. And I don't know what a good way of handling this problem is. I guess this is where we revert back to Winston Churchill's famous quote that democracy is the worst form of government until you look at all the others. But boy, do you get the sense reading this book that these are all a bunch of, I don't know about sociopaths, but narcissists fits most of the people in this book. Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Jonathan Edwards, John McCain, Sarah Palin, Rudy Giuliani, Mitt Romney. I mean, they all come off as unprincipled, ego-driven narcissists. The sympathetic characters in this book are all the staffers who have to put up with their prima donna stuff and put up with all the temper tantrums they throw and all their fits of ego. Now, I guess, again, you have to take a grain of salt because the staffers are also the sources for this book anonymously on Deep Background. The only person who doesn't come off like a complete narcissist or maybe completely unprincipled is Barack Obama, at least in my opinion. So Barack Obama is shown as overconfident and arrogant, and he's got a level of confidence that astounds most of the people who meet him. So, they just assume he's going to be nervous before a big speech, or they assume he's going to be nervous before the debate. And Barack Obama, as somebody who is, quite new to national politics at this whole time, was just like, be cool, I got this, I got game. And then he would just go in and knock it out of the park. So, somebody like me reading this, who's suffered most of my life from social anxiety and really nervous around any kind of public speaking or any kind of social situation, it's I guess it's a reminder that people are made in different ways, huh? And I will never be president of the United States. I could not get up and make all those speeches and be confident, and I couldn't do any of that. Probably a lot of us couldn't. But I guess there are people who can, and Barack Obama is one of them. But, even for all his extreme confidence, he does not come off as somebody who is pathologically driven, like, I have to be the president of the United States. He comes off as just kind of like, the impression I get of him from this book is he was just like the really popular kid who was just like, yeah, I could be president. But if I'm not president, it doesn't matter. I'll just go back to being the cool kid. He's just so full of confidence that he could do it or he could not do it. And I guess maybe because of that, he comes across as the most principled politician in this book, in my opinion. He lays down ground rules early in his campaign. I do not want to become the bad guy. I don't want to lose myself in this race. And he pretty much sticks to those rules, although, as it's pointed out in this book, he does allow his surrogates to do his dirty work. But he himself kind of keeps his hands clean and does not want to shift his positions. Or he doesn't want to demean himself just to become president, which most of the other politicians in this book are completely willing to demean themselves and shift their positions to become president. But at the same time, you do not get the impression that Barack Obama is the most qualified person to become president, which is something that Hillary Clinton was tearing her hair out about in this book. She knew what the healthcare proposal was. She knew how Washington operated. She knew foreign policy. And Barack Obama, at least at the beginning of this book, was underexperienced in all of those. There's a part of me, maybe there's a part of any Democratic voter, who reads this book and thinks, maybe Hillary would have made the better president. She did not have near the charisma as Barack Obama, but maybe Hillary would have gotten more stuff done. Because, I think it's fair to say now in retrospect that Obama came in on a lot of speeches, and then he wasn't as effective as governing. He didn't know how to deal with Congress once he got into the power of being president. And he thought the Republicans would just be reasonable, and the Republicans played political games with him and just rolled all over him. And Hillary Clinton, as she's portrayed in this book, is not nearly as likable as Barack Obama, but organized, driven, determined, iron hard. Maybe Hillary Clinton could have gotten more stuff. Maybe the national healthcare plan wouldn't have been so watered down if Hillary had been driving it instead of Obama. At the same time, though, there are any numerous reasons in this book why Hillary should not have been president. And one of the interesting things in this book is a lot of the prominent Democrats, like Charles Schumer or Harry Reid, were having secret talks with Obama saying, you should run, you should run, you should run, because they were so worried about Hillary getting the nomination. Because of all the baggage that Hillary was carrying with her, the high-handed way Hillary dealt with them, the extramarital affair that Bill Clinton was having, which apparently everyone knew about but never got into the press. So it's interesting that this book didn't derail Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign. I wonder a little bit why there wasn't more attention paid to this. Interesting fact, though, one of the co-authors of this book, Mark Halperin, if you look him up on Wikipedia, he got Me Too'd in 2017, which essentially destroyed his career. A number of women came out and said he harassed them. There's an irony there, given how he has written about all these politicians who thought they were like above the normal statutes of behavior and thought they could get away with everything and stuff like that. You think if anybody would know the dangers of that, it would be the man who had written about what happened to these other politicians. But Well, there you go. Huh? That's another philosophical thing to chew over. Apparently, as part of that Me Too thing, HBO had a miniseries planned on this book. I didn't say what the miniseries was about. Maybe the first half of the book, which ended up getting scrapped. Anyways, I'm out of